I was born in Jersey City a long time ago, 1946. I guess you call it the baby boomer. And then 4 years later, we moved to Island. So I've been here since 1950. Went to St. Cecilia's grammar school. I was the first class there. We used to go to Quonset huts. It was not the building that you see today. And then from there I went to St. Mary's in Perth Amboy, a good Catholic boy. And after that I went to St. Leo's College in Florida. The draft was in effect. 1A meant you were eligible for draft. I was a 2S, which meant a student, which pushed me back in the line a little bit. But 3 of my buddies all went into the Army. One got stationed in Germany, lucky him. One went to Vietnam as a medic. And one never left the United States. I said, I have to serve my country too. John F. Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And so I went to Perth Amboy. The Navy recruiter, he called me in. He says, how about a cup of coffee? Had a cup of coffee with him. He started talking about, and when I was in Greece, this. When I was in France, the wine, this. And I'm going, oh man, this is not like work. I mean, this is, so it signed me up. Came home and told my parents. They were very upset, and told my future bride Carol, and she was very upset. And 2 weeks later, I went up to Great Lakes. So the crew training centers were in Great Lakes, and there was one in San Diego. As luck would have it, I got the absolute coldest one during the absolute coldest time. I went out there in November to Great Lakes, but it's in Illinois, not far from Chicago. I was all excited. You think they'd fly us out there. We took a train out there. One car was devoted to all brand new sailors, supposedly. And we were all excited and never took the opportunity to sleep. And boy, were we sorry about that. We got to Great Lakes. As soon as you get off this beautiful gray bus, navy gray, we started getting hollered at. And I'm going, did I really make the right decision here? We got processed, uniform sized up, and we finally were allowed to go to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I shouldn't say bed, it was a bunk. It was a wooden bunk in a wooden barracks, had no insulation. You could see the wind blowing through or you hear the wind blowing through the clapboards. We had one snorer who you would be lying in your bunk, and all of a sudden you hear him snoring away, and then you hear these footsteps, dun, 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 dun. Then you'd hear whoomp. And he would hit him with a pillow. Then you hear dun, 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 dun. He'd go back, be quiet. About 15, 20 minutes later, you hear dun, 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 boom. It was a comedy, but it was entertainment, I guess. We were supposed to have lights out at 10 o'clock, but we're young men. We were doing silly stuff in the middle of the night. And then 4 hours later, you hear this person banging the side of a garbage can, screaming, reveille, reveille, reveille. And so after 4 hours sleep, we went up and we started boot camp. By the third day, I wanted to fly back or drive back or take the train back to Perth Amboy and choke my recruiter. I thought my God, what did I get into? It was tough. Made it through. There was a swim test. I'll never forget this swim test. One of it was you had to float for 5 minutes. And in the meantime, there's other people around you jumping in the water. They're swimming. So the water's splashing all over there. I'm laying there. I'm trying to breathe. Water's coming down my throat. This one fella, apparently he couldn't swim. So he's flailing away and he's trying to make his way to the edge of the pool. And I saw they had this pole with this nice round thing on the end. I'm thinking, oh God, thank to God they're going to put that out there and let him grab onto it and pull him ashore. No, they were pushing it back. He eventually passed the swim test, as we all did. You had to jump off a 5-foot platform to simulate jumping off a destroyer. You had to jump off a 10-foot platform into the water. And it was an interesting prospect, but they said was make sure you keep your hands at your sides and keep your feet closed, because when you jump in, there might be debris in the water. We had one gentleman who was reluctant to go. And the chief petty officer told the person behind him, shove him. And he did. He dove into the water, not quite the way the chief had told him. Legs were going a mile a minute, arms were going a mile a minute, but he went into the water. And we'd have training, we'd learn how to tie knots, we'd learn how to firefight, we'd go to the gas chamber, your gas mask on, and then they'd tell you to take it off. We'd look at each other like, why would you want to? Took it off, and the only thing I could say was disgusting. Every part of your body is just, it was disgusting. We had the 96 count manual of arms, which is rigorous. We used the M1 rifle. And this is the United States Navy in the 1970s using an M1. But it's a gorgeous rifle. It fires beautifully, very accurate, weighs 9 pounds. So when you're doing the manual and you're holding the rifle straight out like that for any time, it wears on your shoulders and your arms. We had a lot of videos. And I remember we used to sit in bleachers, and I was on the top row of the bleacher, right on the end, and the film was going. And because of sleep deprivation, I was tired, and I dozed off. Fell asleep, fell off the bleachers on top of the camera, knocked the projector, I'm sorry, we didn't have VCRs back then, knocked the projector over. The chief who was giving the class dismissed us right then and there, and everybody's looking at me like, way to go. So I'm not doing that again, guys. Back then you would take a test, and then they would tell you what they thought you were good for. They just said, you got your choice. If you could be either internal communications, which is telephones in the ship, or you could be electrician's mate. And I said, well, let's see, if I get out of the Navy, being an electrician's mate could serve me well. So I was an electrician's mate. They used to kid us that we were light bulb changers, but they called us striker. You were not an electrician yet, you were an electrician striker, sort of an apprentice. We'd all gather in a gym with our sea bags, which had everything we owned. Our entire life belongings were in this one little green thing. And we would sit there and they'd call out your name and you'd get your orders for your next duty station. You had no idea up till then. You were getting 2 weeks home, so you didn't care. You were finally going to go home. I was going to see my girlfriend, my family. Went through boot camp with 2 gentlemen. One was a Robert Holtz, who lived in Chicago. He lived right there. And one was a Jim Kane, who lived in Boston. And I got my orders and it said USS Siera, Norfolk, Virginia. AD 18. After we all got our orders, we started huddling. We were heading to the airport. We were doing this. And I got to the airport and I look and there's Bob and Jim Kane. And their orders were for the USS Siera. We all realized, hey, we went to electrician mate school together. We're going to the same ship together. We're going to be shipmates. And it was nice to have friends there with you. We're actually getting underway. I'm doing what I wanted to do. I'm in the United States Navy. I'm a sailor. The Destroyers were used quite a bit by the Navy, and when they had damage, they would come alongside us. Siera was a destroyer tender, and we would basically tend to them. We would repair them. If they're 5-inch mount needed repair, we could manufacture. We had a machinist shop on board. We had a battery charging stations on board. We had everything on board to make anything for any ship. She went down to Guantanamo Bay once, Port Everglades, very exotic place, and we went up to Boston once. So she basically stayed in port, which lent to leading almost a semi-normal life. So my wife and I decided to get married, which was a mistake. Not to get married because she's a saint, she's a sweetheart, but shortly after that, I got transferred to a steamer. In the Navy, a steamer is, she's out to sea the whole time. I was on board, I got in 68, 69, and 70. I got transfer orders. I had a chief petty officer, I'm not going to mention his name, God rest his soul, who was what you can picture in Gomer Pyle. He was an extremely rough person, and I had an authority figure problem, I guess, because we would just buck heads. My wife was pregnant with my son. I got a phone call on the ship, and she said she was at home in the apartment in Norfolk. We lived down here. That I think I'm giving birth. And I went, oh boy. So I called Norfolk Police Department and I gave them the address. I called the Norfolk Air Station for them to send an ambulance. Because the air station was closer to our apartment. And so I went off the after Brown, and the chief was there, and he said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to my wife, she's having a baby. And he says, the Navy comes for your family. And I kind of blew up. And I said things you shouldn't say to a chief petty officer. Went off the ship, went out to my car, realized I didn't have my keys. I said, no, I gotta go back. Went back, the chief wouldn't, he was that far from my back the whole time. I went down to the berthing compartment, looked for my keys. Couldn't find my keys, borrowed a friend of mine's car. And the whole time he told me, you're gonna spend the rest of your Navy life in a brig. And I'm going, yeah, shut up. But again, a chief is way up there. I headed towards the house and had the four-way flashers on. My friend's car was a Dodge Charger, very nice car. And I see a gray ambulance pulling out. And I go, that's gotta be her. They said, does your husband have a Dodge Charger? There's some lunatic behind us, flashing his lights and blowing his horn and driving erratically. And she goes, oh, no, he had a Rambler. I get my set of orders, and it's for PBR, which is Patrol Boat River, Vietnam. I could not sleep that night when I got that set of orders. I had a friend of mine eventually who was on one. He wrote Laughter on the River of Death, great little book, and he made light of it over there. And he said, he goes, the only way you can get through it is to laugh at it. I went home, reluctant to tell my wife, and she was upset. I went back the next day, and I got called up to the bursar's office, and they said, we got a new set of orders for you. And I go, oh, really? I'm so sad. Apparently, on PBRs, they wanted engineman, which is EN. Now, my rate was electrician's mate, EM, because they had to take care of the engines on board. Electrician's mate, what would he do on a little boat like that? So that's when I got the second set of orders, and that was for the USS Canisteo. She was a fleet oiler. She was in dry dock. Dry dock is where the ship is put into a container, and then the container, the water's pumped out. So they could take it, any damage on the hull, take a look at the propeller, replace the zinc plates that are on there. For those that don't know, zinc is their anti-corrosion. And while she was in the yard, I was trained on, General Electric had installed a weapons elevator, which would move up and down the decks, and then we would transport, besides carrying oil, we carried supplies. Part of the supplies was ammunition, and we would actually carry nuclear warheads. So this elevator would make sure that nothing happened to those nuclear warheads as they went up the decks. So I was the sole person taught on that elevator, which made me somewhat important, I thought, and I definitely thought so. A destroyer would love pulling up next to us because we would give them movies. And if they were good to us, we'd give them good movies. If they were lousy to us, we'd give them the horrible movies. So yeah, we carried ammunition, we carried a lot of food supplies, and two fuels. We carried the regular diesel fuel, and we carried regular aviation gas. One of my jobs was, and it was a great opportunity to make friends, is to go around and check coffee pots to make sure they didn't have electrical leakage, so that someone could get shocked on a coffee pot. There was one instance where the officers' mess, their oven went out, an electric oven, and I went up and I said, I have to order the part for it. So I ordered a part. There was an aircraft carrier in the area, and we were going to rendezvous with them so I could pick up the element. 3 or 4 days later, we haven't met up with the carrier yet. 3 or 4 days later, the chief and crew's mess called for an electrician, so I went and his element went out. I said, I just ordered one for the wardroom. I said, it's going to take a while. I'll see if the carrier has another one. Carrier did not have another one. So I said, it's got to come from the States, so it's going to take a while. He goes, John, I got 200 people I got to feed. So I took the officers. If there are any Canisteo officers listening to this, completely disregard this. I took their heating element and I put it in the crew's oven. The guy loved me. Next time we came into port, he gave me steaks to take home. It was, electrician was a fairly nice position to be in. You stood watch. You had 4-hour watch, 4 hours a day. What you do is you go down to the engine room and you would stand. You're basically just watching a switchboard. There was a transfer of the load from one turbine to the other, and you would alternate every day. It's a give and take, because there was one time I came back, we were on Greece, the island of Greece, and there's a lot of ouzo there. And ouzo, we went to Steve's bar in Greece. Of all bars to go to Steve's. And in Steve's, he explained to us the difference between the different ouzos. He said, always order ouzo with ice. He said, because if it turns cloudy, it means it's got opiates in it. So anyhow, I come back from the beach, from being on Greece, reeking of licorice, which is what ouzo tastes like. Laying in the berthing compartment, and sure enough, here we go again. I hear the frequency lowering. So I did it once. So I go running down there, hard for Corey, turn them on to turbine number 1, start spinning it. They get it on, and there's a frequency meter that goes 360, and you're supposed to transfer the loads when it just about reaches top, not when it gets to top. Because if one generator cycle is this way and the other one is like this, it's not going to marry, because you have to put them on both at the same time for just a moment. I reached over, grabbed it to transfer the load. It was 180 degrees out. You hear this loud boom. There's nothing scarier than a dark, quiet ship. It was silent. Knocked everything out. All of a sudden, I hear dun, 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 all these footsteps. The engineering officer, the captain, the executive officer, all come running down and wanted to know what would happen. So I says, I was transferred the load. I said, and I must have miscalculated the frequency. And the engineering officer goes, go up to your rack. Yes, sir. And the next day, we were just told that anybody who's on the beach is not to go down into the engine room when they return. That was just, I got a slap on the wrist. We didn't have email, we didn't have iPhones, we didn't have any of that. We had letter writing. So you'd write a letter, and hopefully a week or so later, my wife would get it, and then maybe she'd write one, another week or so, I'd get a response. It was always heartwarming. I'd get a picture of what my son was doing, and he's in the backyard doing this or whatever. And that's probably the hardest part of being in the Navy, is being away from your family. I mean, here's my brand new son. I'm gonna miss his first birthday. Somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And the other part is, when in the military, it's not just the person, it's the family. My wife had to take care of everything at home. I mean, the bill paying. If something broke, she would repair it. If it's tough on the spouse. I think it's tougher on the spouse than it is. I mean, I just did my work. I just repaired stuff. But we went to some great places. The Canisteo went to, our first stop was Rota, Spain. Naples was an Italian New York City, is the way best I could describe it. The island of Malta was, it was a British island. There was a NATO base on board, and a lot of British sailors were there, and their British wives. Went to France, the island of Crete. Barcelona was probably the most beautiful city I've ever seen. It was gorgeous, Barcelona. Really, my wife and I went back, and there were 2 places that I visited when I was a sailor, and they were still there. They looked the same. We had to go to Gitmo before we crossed the Atlantic for what they call a shakedown cruise. And you go down there and you test all sorts of things. We fire the gun. We actually had a brand new gun put on Christmas. It was nicknamed Ralph. And Ralph was the prototype of today's phalanx system. The one that when something gets real close to the ship, they fire this, it's a Gatling gun, and it'll take it out. And the reason it was called Ralph is because that's exactly what it sounded like when it fired. Ralph. So they had a drone flying, and that Ralph would be firing away, and Ralph just couldn't hit it. So in the plan of the day, which is the paper you get every day of what's going on the ship, we're going to go to this port of call, or we're going to go here, or we're doing this washdown, or we're going to do the gouging, or whatever it is. It would also have in there, on the very bottom, it would go, Drone 1, Ralph 0. And this went on for days, every time. They even tried a weather balloon, and they held it right in front of the gun and just let it go. And Ralph missed it. What General Electric did was the gun would fire a burst and calculate where it fired the burst, and then find the target, calculate where the target is, and then adjust for the distance and fire. Target is not stationary. Target moved. So it was constantly following the target the entire time. Finally, one day, it had to be 2 weeks later, one of the bosun's mates ties a rope to the weather balloon, lets it up right in front of the gun and says, shoot it. And we did. So that day we had Ralph 1, weather balloon 0. And it was every day everybody was looking forward to that POD, see how well Ralph did. Interesting story in Gitmo, when we were down there, I got assigned shore patrol. In the Navy, it's not like the Army or the Marine Corps, where their military police are trained to be military police. In the Navy, a shore patrol is, this is your duty for the day. Instead of being at the switchboard, you're gonna have 4 hours of shore patrol, and you're always paired with someone else. The way you learn what to do on shore patrol is they hand you a nightstick and a belt to wear it, and a sash that says shore patrol, and they say, you are now shore patrol. That's it. That's all the instructions you get. So Nellie was with me. He was a huge guy, could be a fullback football team. So I felt confident. I got Nellie with me. So we got assigned to the Enlisted Men's Club. And in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, the Enlisted Men's Club is gorgeous. It's a platform over a hill, and you sit out on this patio. It's just beautiful. And Cuba's a beautiful country. So we are there, and all of a sudden, there's a couple of Marines. It was a big Marine base. One of the Marines says, hey, Squid. So I naturally ignored him. He says, hey, Sailor. And I ignored him again. And then he said, hey, Shore Patrol. And I go, yeah, what is it? Can I help you? And he goes, you know what us Marines are good for? And I really shouldn't have, but I turned back to him and said, I can't think of a thing. Which set, I guess that set him off. He says, you know what? He says, one of the things we're real good is fighting. And we got nobody here to fight, so we're going to fight you sailors. So I had Nellie with me. So I go ahead, get up. So he says, not now, when you least expect it. But several hours later, and many beers later after they had, there's a ruckus down this hill. And there is one sailor, and you can tell because he's in his dress whites, that he's getting pummeled by 4 or 5 Marines. So I said, come on, Nellie, let's go. So we're running down the hill. By the way, those nightsticks are like they're stapled in there. It's impossible to get them out. Finally got my nightstick out, went down there, hit a few in the head. You can hear this bonk sound. I never realized that when you hit somebody in the head. And then suddenly, I'm empty-handed. Somebody had my nightstick, and they started swinging at me. I got hit 3 or 4 times. And I said, you know, the sensible thing to do, John, is play dead. So I fell on the ground, laid there, and they started kicking me. And then finally, they finally pulled off. Nellie was nowhere to be found. I went back to the ship and I said, listen, the next time I have shore patrol, I want hazardous duty pay. Besides that nightstick, I want a .45 caliber, and I want all 9 bullets that go in it. The chief petty officer said, are you qualified on the .45 caliber? I said, no. I said, that's why he didn't give it to me on shore patrol. He goes, no, shore patrol will get him. But do you want to qualify? And I go, oh, yeah. So we went to the fantail, and we're underway, and he took a 55-gallon drum, and he threw it overboard, and he said, shoot the drum. So I emptied the .45 caliber, beautiful weapon. It's got a nice little kick. Never hit the drum. So I hand him the gun back, and I said, okay. I said, I guess I try again. He goes, no. He says, you're qualified. I go, I didn't hit the drum. He goes, you hit the ocean though, right? I go, yeah. It took us 3 weeks to cross the Atlantic, which is because we're playing a lot of games out there. We had the USS Forrestal come alongside us. We were pumping aviation fuel over, and they're having jets take off. And I don't know if you ever would check, it hits the afterburners just as it gets to the end of the runway on a carrier, and this huge flame goes out. And we're pumping aviation fuel over, but this is not a smart idea. Over the sound system, you would hear, prepare for underway replenishment, USS Forrestal coming up on port side. They were always on the port, and destroyers were on the starboard side. Or you would hear USS Tucker approaching on the starboard side. We prepare for unrep. Unrep is very interesting. Our Navy is the only Navy that does it. You're underway, and you're refueling your ship while you're moving. So it keeps the Navy going to where their target is. We fire a cord across to the other ship. They take that and they pull the cord, and we attached this hose, and it's attached to a metal wire. It's held at 90 pounds taut the whole entire time. On the bottom is this hose. You hook the hose up with a pelican hook, and you pump oil. So we were pumping oil to the USS Forrestal, and I was in the internal communication shop on the O2 level. It's first level, O1, O2 is a ship. If it's O anything, it's above the waterline, which is good. And somebody comes running in, and he grabs onto his tape recorder, and he says, "We're going to collide." And I go, "What do you mean you collide? That's silly." I stepped out. Now this is the O2 level, and I looked up, and here's the carrier over the top of us. We hit. I'll never forget, there was a guy on the fantail with his little 8mm camera filming this, as we had these big stanchion poles, and it poked one of the jets and knocked the jet into the water. So there's millions of dollars in the water, and this guy's filming it. And the chief petty officer went over to him, grabbed the camera, threw it in the ocean. And I was getting to that filming. But yeah, we collided with the USS Forrestal, punched a hole in our stack. We knocked off one of their jets. We'd encounter Soviet Navy, but they would be disguised as a trawler. For a fishing vessel, there were more antennas there than on any one of the towers that we see around town. It was all antennas. And they would purposely pretend to break down in front of us to make us divert. They would try to do that if we were doing unrep. So it would really be panic. And our captain, he was a funny guy. He called for emergency breakaway. We were refueling 2 destroyers. They took off, and he just said, "Full steam ahead, let's cut her in half." So we're all up on the bow. We're watching, this is going to be fun. We're going to cut this boat. And they were powered. You know, they were just pretending it broke down. And then they started, you want to see them scurry on the decks, though. It's fun to watch. We were in the Mediterranean, and I remember hearing, "Prepare for underway replenishment, USS Santa Barbara approaching, starboard side." Santa Barbara was an ammunition ship. My job during the unrep was to maintain the elevator, which was a great job because it ran smooth. It was brand new. And we were pumping over to the Santa Barbara, and we didn't have to use the elevator. So I just sat there and watched, and all of a sudden I look and I see the friend of mine who I went to A school with, Jim Kane, from Boston. They were having a PI, personnel inspection. So they're all in their fancy whites, and I'm in on the oiler, dungarees, oil, scroungy looking oiler sailor, hollering, "Hey Jim Kane, hey Jim Kane." The man inspecting him, he told me this later on, walked up to him and said, "Do you know that guy?" He goes, "I have no idea who that is." Jim and I just went and we did what sailors do. And on the way back, there was a bus that would take you to the piers. And Jim had quite a bit. And he dozed off and he got sick all over the window. We got to the dock. I said, "Here, let me help you." And he looks and he goes, "Oh my God." He goes, "That's disgusting. Who did that?" I go, "You did." that was you, Jim. And to this day, we're still close friends, Jim and I. We talk all the time, and he's a good man. The Navy have a short timers calendar, which you got a picture of a young lady, and you color in until you get to day 1, which means you're out. So I'm about halfway through my short timers calendar, and I'm on a chow line, and all of a sudden somebody behind me bumps me with his tray, and being a young and invincible man, which that's what we always thought we were, I was ready to turn around and belt him and think I did, and it was the captain of the ship. So he goes, "Hi, Eberhardt," and I go, "Hey, Captain." So he got online, he filled his tray. Obviously, I'm looking at mine, looking at his. Well, they're giving him an awful lot. They're giving me. But so he sat down with me and he says, "I understand your tour of duty is up." And I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "Well, what are your plans for the future?" I said, "Well, I'm thinking about going back to college." I said, "And maybe coming back as an officer." That thought never crossed my mind. Never. There's no way I wanted anything to do with the Navy. I wanted out. And so he goes, how about this, John? He goes, if you re-enlist, I will send you to officer candidate school and guarantee you to come back to this ship. Nice offer. And I'm thinking to myself, this is a oiler. This is a garbage scow. Why would I want to come back here? I didn't say it out loud. I just said, well, sir, I'm thinking of going to college, getting my degree, and then coming back as an officer. But I'd love to come back to this ship. That's not going to happen. Flew from Greece to Germany, then I flew from Germany to the state, to McGuire. Got off the plane, what a sight to see my son for the first time in a long time, in 10 months. And my wife at McGuire Air Force Base. And then I had 2 weeks of duty in Brooklyn Navy Yard to get separated. During my time at Brooklyn Navy Yard, this chief first wanted me to get a haircut, and I said, you got to be kidding me. So what are you going to do to me? I mean, send me overseas again? I mean, I'm getting out. Leave me alone. And he gave me what they call as a brig chaser. So someone is going in to see a court-martial or a captain's mess, so you have to escort them like you're escorting a prisoner. I was told that if they try to escape, and some of them have, you got to make sure you got to get them. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm getting out in 3 days. If he runs, I don't care. Go, just go. And I finally got separated. After I got separated, my wife and I are happily living. I got a job, and we moved down to Lawrence Harbor for a while. And I get a letter from the United States Naval Reserve saying, unless I report to Perth Amboy in 90 days, that I'm going back on active duty. Oh, no, this isn't good. I called the American Civil Liberties Union because I didn't know who else to call. And they said, John, they can't do that to you. I said, oh, good, thank you. I said, but now what do I do? He says, you're going to have to go there. He says, whoever wrote that letter, whoever signed it, Bob, you go to them and just explain to them that you do understand that there is a reserve, that you can be, but you choose not to. You prefer to stay, but they call it inactive reserve. For 2 years, you're in active reserve. If they need you, they'll call you, but other than that, you don't have to go to 2 weeks. And walk in very sarcastically, the guy goes, I said, I need to see the chief, White or whatever his name was. And the guy says, well, you go down, take the ladder up. And I go, oh, you mean stairs? He was talking naval terms, everything, and I kept correcting. He would say door, I go hatch, or vice versa. I walk into the chief, and I threw his letter on the desk, and I go, what is wrong with you? And the chief goes, John, relax. He says, you want a cup of coffee? And I go, the Navy runs on coffee. Had a cup of coffee. He says, I just want to tell you the good parts about the reserves. I just, we can't put you back on active duty. You did your duty. Most important, everybody thinks that honorable discharge is, because it looks pretty, is your most important piece of paper. It is not. DD 214, Defense Department 214. That is your most, it tells you everything about what you did in the Navy or Army or wherever it is. And that is what we call your golden ticket. When I've been just dealing with the Veterans Administration, they need to see that first. Oh yeah, you were a veteran. The proof that you did serve. Okay, so I got $8.30 some cents. I forget what it was, but and they said, adios. First job I got when I got out was with Interior Communications Executone. I was repairing intercom systems. And then from there, I went to repairing biomedical equipment. I was repairing kidney machines, dialysis machines, laser nephrolometers, blood cell separators. So I learned quite a bit in electrician's made school. But I got very active in Woodbridge. I met Jim McGreevy, and that's when Jim said, I could use you in the recreation department. And that's when I started the recreation department. We decided to have a Woodbridge Edison soccer competition, and they had a program called Buddy Bowl. We did not. Jim and the mayor back then of Edison decided they'd give us some players, and we would play Woodbridge against Edison. And again, thanks to Woodbridge Television, we went down to announce it, and that was probably the hardest I ever had to announce because I was getting choked up. I was watching these kids in wheelchairs with a milk crate in the front to push the soccer ball. I was watching a blind person hold tightly onto a person's hand and to tell him when to kick it. And I'm announcing the game, and I'm choking up, and I'm going, he said, why don't we have this? I mean, we've got we've got kids that I'm sure can use this program. So I went to the then Mayor McGreevy and I said, I want to start a buddy ball program. And he said, keep the cost down. He says, go right at it. And we started Woodbridge buddy ball back then. We started with soccer, which was easy. You kick a ball. Then went to basketball, which was a little harder. You got to bounce the ball and you got to throw it. Then Kevin Fee, who's a co-founder with me, we went to baseball. Now you're saying to yourself, you're nuts. You've got physically and developmentally challenged youngsters who have to throw a ball, catch a ball, hit a ball, run the bases. Somehow these kids are superstars. They plow through it. Basketball, we had a blind child. He would take a cane and tap the rim, and that's how he would hear. And again, you guys were there filming this stuff, so we get the word out that, hey, there are these things for these kids. And we grew. And from there, a gentleman came to me and said, we ought to do hockey. And I go, like this 24 hours in a day. If you can get another one in there, I'm good. So we started with sled hockey. Contacted New York Rangers. They helped sponsor us. We play at Madison Square Garden. But we used to go to tournaments in different areas of the state in Pennsylvania. And we went to one in Philadelphia, and Tom Brake calls me. He goes, come on over here, you got to see this game. And we went and I saw what they called a special hockey. And I watched that. It was for the developmentally challenged. And I watched the reaction on these kids when they scored a goal, when they stole the puck from somebody else. They're playing a real game of hockey, even though they have a challenge. They're playing the real game of hockey, and they're leaving that. They learn something. The socialization is great. They lose together, they win together. They play as a team, and those kids, you can holler at them 1 minute, say they're not working hard enough, and then they're hugging you at the end. It's just, they're so appreciative, and they learn so fast. It was a labor of love. Well, I was president of Veterans Alliance, 10 different veterans organizations in this town. God bless Woodbridge for that. We try to get them all to work collectively so they're not bucking heads. And what a great bunch of guys. You get them together, and after the meeting we'll have a beer or two, and that's when it really starts. Hey, you Navy guys were this, you Marines were jarheads, you Army guys were, you crawl in the mud. I mean, it's fun. Also the chaplain of Post 471. I also do the newsletter for Post 471. Young Marines, it's an organization sponsored by the Marine Corps League, and we follow very similar to the Marines. We have a 26-hour boot camp, recruit training, where they learn military discipline, they learn military courtesies and customs. They wear battle dress uniform. It's just like the Marines. They do close order drills. Matter of fact, we are honored because the last two St. Patrick's Day parades, they asked us to carry this huge American flag the entire length of a street. And it was very hard to carry. Not only did they carry it, they marched with it. They did not call cadence because according to the military code, if you're carrying the flag, you do not holler cadence. But when they got to reviewing sand, and this was on the initiative of my youth commander, not me. I never told them to do this. They did halt, and they did an hoorah. And it just set everybody in the area just went completely nuts. They're a great bunch of kids. They learn leadership, teamwork, and discipline. Our future's in great hands with these kids. Service in the Navy, would I do it again? No. Was it a good time? Yes. Was it a bad time? Yes. I was young and I was invincible. I did not think I could ever die. And I think it prepared me for life, prepared me for the rest of my life. It's a great growth. I recommend military service, even though the time I was in it I wasn't super happy, but I recommend it to anyone who's looking for a career. The military is an excellent place. And I think it helped me. I mean, it helped me in my working here in the community and my perspective on other people and service to people. And that's the nice thing again about Veterans Alliance is they continue to serve. There's something about a veteran who has to serve. They got to do things for other people.